So on Friday, we started taking square roots. Today we're going to focus on two-step equations, where on Friday we had one-step equations. All we did was something like x squared equals, I don't know, let's do 16. So if it's x squared equals 16, what was the one step we technically did? Take the square root. Because remember, squares and square roots cancel, so you take the square root of both sides. The square root of x squared is x, and what's the square root of 16? That's your answer? X equals 4? Nope. Plus minus. So remember the note you made to yourself on Friday that said anytime you're solving and you take the square root, you have to have one positive, one negative? That still applies. Okay, so after you take the square root, or as you're taking the square root, you're going to have 1 plus 1 minus. Today we're going to focus on adding and subtracting and then dividing as well. Okay, but again, you will always have two answers. Don't forget your plus minus. So let's just move into it. Let's look at x squared plus 1 equals 45. Now, don't lose any of your algebra skills because we go back to algebra. The goal is to get x by itself. So if you wanted to get x by itself, what would you do? What would be your first step? Subtract 1 from both sides. Okay, that's our algebra skills. So x squared equals 44. I still need to get x by itself. How do I get x by itself? Square root both sides. Okay. Is 44 a perfect square? No, so we need to do what to simplify it? Factor tree. Okay, so let's do the factor tree and see what we get. So two numbers that multiply to 44. 4 and 11. And then 4 breaks down to 2 times 2. I have a pair of 2's with the 11 left over. So x equals, I took a square root, so it's plus minus. The 2's come out. The 11 stays inside. That plus minus should always be out front because there will be times where we're going to have to subtract or add at the end, but it should always go right in front of the square root information. Okay, so this is going to be our answer. So the only additional step today is we're adding or subtracting and then potentially dividing. Okay, but it's your algebra skills from IM1 and then understanding you have to take the square root and you have a plus minus. You think we can handle that? Okay, so let's try, we're going to do a couple together and then I'm going to give you a couple to do. So let's do n squared minus 4 equals 96. So step 1 to getting n squared by itself would be what? Add 4 to both sides. N squared equals 100. I'm going to take the square root. Is 100 a perfect square? Yeah. Yep. So n equals plus or minus 10. Good. Okay, what about this one? So negative 4k squared equals negative 244. Just like before, our goal is to get the variable by itself. So what would I do to get k squared at this point by itself? divide by -4. Because currently I'm multiplying, so opposite of multiplication is division. That allows those to cancel out, giving me k squared equals, what'd you say, Destiny? 61. So -244 divided by -4 is a positive 61. And then we're going to take the square root of both sides. Is 61 a perfect square? No. And then what are its factors? Does it have any factors? Christina says no.
I said yes. I don't know. I haven't checked.
So let's go through. Let's see. I know it's not going to be divisible by 2. 61 divided by 3, no. Divided by 4, no. 5 won't go into it. 61 divided by 6, no. Okay, now I want to show you what's going to happen. And here's how you know when you can stop checking. So right now I have 61 divided by 6. So I'm at 6 and 10, right? So 61 divided by 7 gives me 8. Well, what would be the next number I would divide by after 7? 8. And that already has kind of popped up. We would be recycling numbers. Okay, so there's nothing that we can do. So our final answer is k equals plus or minus the square root of 61. Okay, I want to try one more division with you, and then I'm gonna let you try a couple, and then we'll call it a day. So let's look at 16n squared equals 1. So what would step 1 be? Divide by 16. Okay, so if I divide by 16, the 16s cancel, and I'm left with n squared equals what? 1/16. Do not make it a decimal. You're going to leave it as a fraction. But look how nicely this works out for us. Okay, the next step would be to take the square root of both sides, right? So the square root of n squared is n. Now, I'm going to look at this fraction separately. I'm going to take the square root of the numerator and the square root of the denominator. What is the square root of 1? 1. What's the square root of 16? 4. So our answer is plus minus 1/4. So when you take the square root of a fraction, look at the numerator and the denominator separately. Okay, this is going to be the hardest one. There should be 0 decimals, though, in any of your answers. It should be a fraction or it should be a simplified radical. Okay? All right, let me give you a couple to do. We'll see how you do, and if we do okay, we will be done. So let's try -8p squared equals -672. R squared plus 3 equals 48. A squared equals 25. Oops. Okay, so there's the first 3, and I'll move the other one up in a second. You can't see that. Let me try again. There we go. I'm going to kind of just go through it. If you need me to stop or re-explain something, I'll do that. But for number 5, we're going to start by dividing by 8, -8. And we get p squared equals 84. From there, we're going to take the square root of both sides. I know 84 is not a perfect square, so I have to figure out what divides into it. 4 does, so 4 and 21. 4 breaks down to 2 and 2. 21 breaks down to 3 and 7. So I have a pair of 2s with a 3 and a 7 left over. So P equals plus or minus, some of you were forgetting that. The 2 comes out, 3 and 7 stay inside for 21. So you should have a plus or minus 2 square root of 21 as your answer. Okay. Number 6, you should have started by subtracting 3 from both sides. So r squared equals 45. Is 45 a perfect square? No. So I'm going to square root, and I'm in a factor tree. So that's what, 9 and 5, and 3 and 3. I have a pair of 3s, and this 5 left over. So r equals plus or minus, what comes out? The 3, the 5 stays inside. Okay. Number 7. We should have started by doing what? Dividing by 100. Okay, so some of you gave me a squared equals 25 over 100 and you took the square root, which is fine. But does 25 and 100 reduce at all? By what? By 25, right? Okay, I'm going to do it the way I saw most of you do it. It's going to work either way. So whether you reduce before or at the end, it's going to work. So I'll leave it like this. We take the square root of both sides. So a equals plus or minus, what's the square root of 25? 5. What's the square root of 100? 10. Now if I look at that fraction, I should say to myself, that is not fully reduced and you have to reduce it. What goes into 5 and 10? 5. So 5 goes into itself once, 5 goes into 10 twice. So a equals plus or minus 1/2 should be your answer. If you put 5 over 10, you're going to lose points because you didn't reduce. Now, I could have reduced up here, and I could have had a squared equals 1 over 4, because 25 goes into itself once, 25 goes into 100 4 times. And then when I took the square root, what's the square root of 1? What's the square root of 4? 2. So either way, you get the same answer. Sometimes it's easier to reduce first. If you don't see that right away, that's fine. But if it's a fraction, you need to check. Okay. Lastly, number 8, I'm going to add 3 to both sides, giving me k squared equals 16. If I take the square root, k equals what? Plus or minus 4. How did we do overall? Good? Did we get 100%? Yeah? No? Do you see where you went wrong? Yeah? Okay, so for the remainder of the period,